Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I woke before sunrise and went straight to the comms room. The monitors showed a pale line over the harbor and a thin fog along the lower road. The sector map blinked once in blue and logged a motion alert in Sector 12 near the rear slope. I brought up the camera and there he was, not moving, half sunk into brush, watching the house. I did not say anything for a minute. I just watched how he stood, feet planted, shoulders low, head tilted like he was lining up distance without a scope. That stance was trained. I told Renee we had company. She came in with her hair tied and leaned over my shoulder. She did not speak either. We both knew this was not a stray. I toggled to thermal for confirmation. The outline held steady, no weapon raised. He did not test the fence. He just watched. I zoomed until the picture broke into blocks and then backed off. I logged the time, marked his position, and cut the feed to avoid any reflection. Renee wrote the note on the board. Observer at rear slope, unknown male, hold. Noah came in with a battery pack and saw the board. He asked if we should fly the tethered drone. I told him no free flight, only the tether and only long enough to verify. He rigged the line, eased the drone up through the garage hatch and kept it under the roof edge. I took the controller and nudged it to the tree line. At 15 meters, I caught his face in profile, scar on the cheek, short haircut under a dark cap. I knew that shape but could not place it. I grabbed the old precinct photo from the pinboard and held it next to the screen. The match took a second and then locked in. I had seen him around the Richmond precinct when I still had contracts that needed signatures. Detective Vincent Rago, off-duty some days, always in the hall, always near doors. I lowered the drone, cut power, and set it down. The house air felt tighter after that. Renee stood at the map and drew a red line along the slope. She said his type did not come alone. I told her to assume he had a spotter lower down with a radio. Noah asked if we should challenge him by intercom. I said no contact, not yet. Watching a watcher tells you more. We kept a routine, breakfast on the run, quiet voices. I walked the inner hall with a suppressed carbine and checked each window. No floodlights, no noises we did not choose. I found Owen in the mudroom checking the spear tool. He had cleaned the shaft and filed the tip. He asked if he should move a sentry platform outside. I told him those were now manual only and indoor. We keep surprises for the inside, not the lawn. By 9, the grid dipped for 9 minutes and came back. The freezer pinged once and then settled. Water flowed strong, gas stove lit. Internet slowed, but stayed alive long enough for cached pages. The city still held enough power to pretend. That helped us only because it masked our generator windows. Near midday, the white panel van rolled past the bend. Taped plate. Same model we had logged before. It did not stop. The driver did not look in our direction this time. That was worse than staring. It meant he knew we were there and did not need to check. I marked the past time. It matched the end of a shift at the repurposed precinct. Renee set a bottle of disinfectant on the comms desk and told me to mark new rules in writing. I wrote them large on a torn box flap and pinned it above the screens. Gate stays shut. First contact answered with words. Second with force. No outside help. No exceptions. I watched her read it. She did not smile. She just nodded and went to restock the first aid bins. Harold moved between the porch and the kitchen with his radio pressed to his ear. He caught short bursts on an old band. Voices said nothing useful. Repeats of old advisories. The same anchor voice we had been hearing for days. Each loop sounded more out of date than the last. He shut it off by noon and said he did not like ghosts. Gus's daughter Gianna had been here since the first week with her toddler. They slept in the study because the pantry felt too close and the child woke at every noise. At 1400, Sector 12 went quiet. The brush where Rego had stood now showed empty ground. I walked to the east window and checked the lower slope with a small pair of binoculars. Nothing. No prints I could catch at that distance. Just leaves and old rain lines. Owen took a short step toward the gate, and I shook my head. We keep distance. He stayed put. That night we ran a short generator window masked by wind. The hum sat low through the floor. Noah stood under the basement stairs and counted down with a watch. At 15 minutes I cut power. The house fell quiet again. The hill held. I felt the edge of the wound in my shoulder from the earlier scrape against the gate bolt. Renee checked it and changed the wrap. No infection. It made me sharper. I wanted fewer choices and faster answers. At dusk, the van came back and paused longer than before. A phone screen lit inside the cab, then went dark. The van rolled an extra 20 meters and parked behind a hedge at the curve. We watched it for an hour. No doors opened, no footsteps, only condensation building on the windshield. At 2200, the van left. I slept on a chair in the comms room and woke every 20 minutes even without an alarm. Day 12 began with another Sector 12 ping and then silence. He was out there again but deeper. I kept cameras off more than on to avoid lens glare. We ate quick. The house smelled of bleach and stew. May tried to keep talk normal. No one joined her. Even the dog slept near the pantry instead of the couch. Animals know things in a simple way. I watched that and took it as data. I pulled the family into the garage for a short drill. No speeches, just moves, entry angles, door control, short commands. Owen took the lead on the spear with Gus shadowing. Renee timed our transitions to cover blind corners. Marina sat on a crate and tracked who stood where so she could point someone to help if a call came. Ava practiced securing the deadbolt on the pantry door, then unlocking it on command. She did it fast without noise. Around 10, the grid died for 30 minutes and then came back weaker. Lights dimmed, refrigerator hummed unevenly. That was a warning. I told Noah to push our next generator window to a masking moment only. No fixed hours from now on. We would ride weather, distant sirens, and wind. Routine helps attackers. We were done with that. Zahir moved slower that morning. He kept his eyes down and his phone in his pocket. The network was dead for real calls, but habits do not die clean. I asked if he had family nearby. He nodded and said his sister lived near the park. He asked if the gates would ever open again. I said when it was safe. He looked at the floor and said he understood. I knew he did not believe me. I also knew I would not change the answer. By noon, a new sheet of paper was under the gate. Official letterhead, clean stamp from the Richmond precinct. It read, "All residents to report for relocation. Bring identification. Cooperate with officers. Refugee center assignment provided at checkpoint." It had no date and no signature. The font lines were clean. The ink was fresh. It was bait. I photographed it and slid it into a plastic folder. I left it where it had been dropped. Let the sender think we took orders. I gathered Renee and Noah and Owen in the comms room and drew a triangle on a notepad. 1 point for us, 1 for law, 1 for looters. I wrote the same word next to both outside points. Hungry. Everyone nodded. We were now the pantry on the hill. That is how people would think of us. I adjusted the sentry platform positions and parked one just inside the garage aimed at the inner hall. It would not fire without a person on the trigger. No automation now. Mistakes in the quiet get people killed. At 1500, fog came up the slope. The cameras showed static and slow drift. I switched to thermal for a count. 2 cold spots near the bend. Parked vehicle scale. 1 hot spot moving along the lower ditch. Not infected. 2 measured. I stepped away from the monitor and walked the hall to ease the need to act. Action is not always force. Sometimes it is waiting with a plan. Evening brought another grid dip. 9 minutes out, 2 in, 12 out, then back. That pattern said the city was throwing power from one zone to another to keep some lights alive. It meant fewer engineers and more software running by script. I set a generator window under the longest out. We gave the freezers a hard chill for 10 minutes and cut. Night gave us a test. A muffled knock at the back fence. Not loud, not urgent. A test for presence and response. We did not respond. After a minute, a single pebble clicked against the metal panels. Then nothing. No footsteps away. No follow-up. Rago was marking distances with sound. I marked them too on the map. I logged the corner he chose. He had picked the only spot with a shallow grade close enough for a vehicle approach. That confirmed his intent. I slept in the chair again, shoulder tight, mind clear, no dreams. I woke to Harold reporting a new loop on his radio. Same anchor voice from days ago, now under static so heavy the words turned muddy. He turned it off and set the receiver down. He did not want to listen to playbacks of a city that was already gone. Neither did I. Day 13 arrived with clear air and a dry wind from the bay. The skyline across the water still held a few lit windows. The rest stood dark. The lower road had 4 abandoned cars now, 2 with doors open, 1 without a tire. The 4th had a blanket stuffed in the back window. Those small changes matter. They show the rate of failure. I wrote them down because writing makes decisions easier later. I found Renee in the kitchen washing cans for reuse. She said supplies were fine for food but short for medicine. She needed more sterile pads and alcohol. I told her to plan for less sterile and more boiled. She nodded and set the kettle on the gas for as long as we still had gas. We both watched the flame and then stopped. Sitting with a flame will make you restless. We had work. Owen asked for a walk of the inner yard. I took him and Gus and we moved slow along the fence. We checked every bolt and hinge. Gus tightened the cross braces he had added. The metal showed stress where the last infected had struck it. I ran a finger along the bend and hated the softness there. It was honest. It told me how many hits it would take to fail. I went inside and drew a second brace plan over it. Gus said he could weld it in a day. I told him to get the steel ready and wait for weather cover to mask the sound. At noon, the white van returned, slower than before. It rolled up to the bend, paused, and backed away into the trees. I watched the camera and told Noah to cue the tethered drone for a look straight down over the hedge. He pushed it to the edge, and we saw only tire tops and a dark hood under branches. No faces, no plates. We pulled the drone back and killed power. No second look. Curiosity can get you killed faster than hunger. That afternoon, a quiet passed over the hill that did not feel empty. It felt held. Dogs in nearby yards had stopped barking 2 days ago. There were no sirens now, no ferry horns, only leaves, and the turbine blades turning on the north post. Even that sound felt loud. I ordered the blades locked for the night. Batteries would carry us. Noise draws attention. Near dusk, I saw a piece of paper under the gate again. I left it. We ate dinner in the garage because the house felt tight and the air there moved. May served stew and rice and no one asked for seconds. Zahir kept looking toward the hallway that led to the service door. I watched his eyes, not his hands. Fear pulls people to exits even when they stay put. I told him to sit by Harold and help log the radio times. He obeyed, and his eyes steadied. Around 1900, a short, hard knock sounded at the front post. I pulled up the camera. 2 silhouettes moved out of frame. I switched to thermal. One hot shape near the gate and a cooler cluster near the trees. A whisper passed through the intercom. A man's voice said the word relocation in a steady tone, then silence. I did not answer. He did not repeat. The shape stood for a long minute and then left. That was Rego. He was sizing the distance between words and force. I called Renee to the comms room and laid out the last 3 days on the board. Watcher on day 11, bait under gate on day 12, test at the post on day 13. The pattern was a triangle closing the gap. There would be no talk next time. I wrote it out in plain words and underlined it. Next contact is an attack. We plan for a vehicle. We plan for 2 shooters. We plan to be hit through the gate. We adjusted everything after that. Sentry platform moved inside the hall. Spear tool staged at the mudroom. Ammunition spread across 2 rooms so a single breach would not starve us. Owen took the gate position with a headset. Noah set the generator to a manual key-only start and locked the switch box. Renee rebuilt the first aid station with rapid reach in mind, not neat rows. I walked the inside of the house twice with Ava and showed her the angles where the camera blind spots lived. She memorized them fast. I wrote one more rule and taped it to the pantry door. If unknown person enters house past 10 steps, shoot. No warnings. No discussions. I stood there until I believed it myself. I did not want to see another face at close range and hesitate. That hesitation cost more than supplies. It cost hours and people. We were done with that too. After dark, I took first watch with Owen, while Noah checked the lower vents for mesh gaps. Renee sat with the radio off, eyes closed, counting under her breath. I knew the numbers. She was timing our generator windows and linking them to wind gusts and far-off construction booms that still echoed from somewhere on the mainland. She was building a rhythm that an outsider could not read. That is how you stay invisible inside a house with a heartbeat. Near midnight, I made one more pass by the screens. The rear slope was empty. The bend was empty. The lower road had one moving shape headed away from us. We locked the interior doors and lay down in clothes. No one slept long. We did not need long. We needed to be ready. The hill was quiet. That was not comfort. That was the pause before someone pushes. I woke to a dimmer house. The grid dipped at dawn and did not return for 20 minutes. When it blinked back, the light was weak and uneven. We ran no generator window. I walked the rooms and logged every sound. Water still ran. Gas still burned. Internet crawled and kept dropping. Renee handed me coffee and said the same phrase 3 times in different ways. The city is moving energy around without people. I said, then we stop acting on schedules. She said, already done. She had taped new timing on the fridge. Windows masked by wind only. Late morning, the paper under the gate collected new footprints. 2 sets, boot tread and a sneaker pattern. I did not open the camera more than a flash. The van at the bend was gone. Sector 12 stayed cold. The silence felt planned. We checked gear. Owen took the gate headset, rifle slung. He looked steady and focused. Gus brought the spear tool and leaned it by the mudroom. Noah adjusted the manual cutoff on the generator again and locked the box. I put the sentry platform inside the hall, where its barrel cleared the corner. The rule was set in my head. Talk first, shoot second, only once. The grid cut at midday, full dark, no return. We waited 30 minutes and got nothing. Across the bay, towers faded by floors, then whole buildings. The skyline emptied. I said the thing I had been avoiding. Assume the grid is done. Renee answered. Then we ride batteries and wind when we can, and we pick our noise. She moved through the house and shut down every non-essential drawer. The air felt still. You learn the sound of a live building. You also learn when it stops. The first hour of full outage passed in a slow crawl. We ate cold food. We counted steps. Harold tried the radio and picked up only static and a long dead tone on a maritime band. I set a 10-minute generator window for a hard chill and timed it to a gust front moving in from the water. When the wind hit, Noah turned the key. The house filled with careful noise. Renee stood in the hall counting under her breath. At exactly 10 minutes we cut it. The quiet snapped back. We all listened without meaning to. Nothing moved outside. That was worse than any siren. The armored patrol SUV arrived the next day just after noon. I saw the shape first. Low and heavy. Grill guard bent. Extra plate welded over the doors. It rolled slow up the hill and stopped square in front of the gate. Dirt and salt covered the paint. 2 men stepped out. Clean helmets. Vests that fit. Their uniforms were dirty but arranged. Professional enough to pass at a distance. One held a clipboard and talked through the intercom. He said they were conducting checks for relocation to a refugee center. He said families were being moved for safety. He said this was an order. He said refusal would be recorded. His voice was steady, not kind. Renee stood beside me, calm and straight. She said, "We're not leaving. The house is secure. We will stay in place." The man told her she had to open the gate so they could confirm head count. I said, "No gate. We will show ID at the camera if required." He stared into the lens and said nothing for 5 seconds. Then he glanced to his partner without moving his head. The partner shifted a step to the right, lining sight through the slats. I realized the angle and started to speak, but the first shots came tight and fast through the gate. Owen dropped before I finished saying his name. He hit the ground hard and did not get up. The rounds punched through the wood post and sparked against the frame. I felt a blunt strike across my shoulder and landed behind the cabinet, heat spreading into my sleeve. Renee dragged me by the belt into the hall without a word. Noah shouted from the garage that he had the angle. Gus pulled the spear and took the side door. The men outside kept firing short bursts into hinges and posts. The SUV engine revved. I heard the driver call a name into his mic. The name was not ours. It sounded like a simple go. We fired back from cover. Noah hit the passenger in the thigh. The man folded near the bumper and tried to crawl behind the front wheel. He did not make it far. The driver snapped 3 shots through the slats and then reversed hard, metal scraping concrete. Renee knelt over me and cut my shirt open with small scissors. The round had grazed meat and left a hot line. No deep hole. She poured disinfectant, wrapped the shoulder tight, and told me to stay down. I said, "I can move." She said, "Then move smart." When we reached the gate, the driver was already 20 meters down the hill, fishtailing and throwing dust. The dead officer lay on the gravel with one hand under his chest. We pulled him behind the barrier and stripped plates and weapon. The serials were filed. Inside the vest pocket was a folded map page with 2 circles, one around our service road, one around the lower fuel shed. The handwriting used block letters. Renee read it and looked at me. She did not need to say anything. Someone had given up our layout. We hauled Owen inside and covered him with a tarp in the garage. No speeches. Everyone knew he had been the steady one at night. I moved back to the comms room and sat while Renee cleaned the bandage again. Harold stood by the door and stared at the floor. He did not speak. May brought water and left it in a neat line. That little act held the room together. You see who can still think when the noise stops. We took apart the dead officer's sidearm and cleaned it. The plates went to Noah. The helmet had a small camera with a broken mount. I kept it and wiped the contacts. Later that night, Noah got the feed to play on a small screen. The angle was bad and the sound worse, but we heard a short voice order at the start of the approach. The tone was clipped and familiar. It matched the man I had watched on the slope. Detective Ruggo, not on camera, in command, not here to protect, here to collect. We rebuilt the gate with what we had. Gus welded a new cross brace and added a shorter bar at knee height to break a shoulder charge. The smell of hot metal filled the yard. Renee timed the welds with wind gusts and made Gus pause when the air went still. Noah bolted a sheet of shelving to the inside as a deflector. It was ugly and rigid. That was enough. The spear leaned by the door again. The sentry platform stayed in the hallway with the safety on, and a person next to it. Night brought a long stretch of quiet that did not feel safe. The grid stayed dead. Water still ran, but at lower pressure. The gas flame looked smaller. I set 2 generator windows at odd times, masking them with the only sounds we could count on. The wind, a distant crash that might have been a building face falling, and once the faint crackle of a fire somewhere past the bay. We chilled the freezer, charged the radios, and cut power fast. Every minute of noise now felt like a bet. Renee sat me down on a chair in the garage and rechecked the shoulder. She changed the wrap and handed me a small dose from the locked box. She said, "You do not get infection, not now." I said, "I am fine." She said, "You are moving. That is not the same thing." We both understood what that meant. Movement is not health. It is just movement. I stood anyway. Day 16 started with the sound of a single car rolling past the bend, then reversing. I logged it and moved on. We sat down for a short meeting in the dining room with the shades drawn. I laid out 3 points on the table with bottle caps. Us, Rego, infected. I pushed the infected cap toward the other 2. I said, "He will use them if he can. He almost tried today. The shots at the gate were to see our response time, not to win." Renee said, "Then he will come again with noise." Noah said, "So we build for a vehicle." I nodded and told Gus to prepare a shallow trench before the gate for a tire trap. Gus said he could do it fast if the soil held. We rationed water. Marina cleaned counters with a thin mix of bleach and rain barrel. May reorganized the pantry to move quick meals higher. Ava taped a paper to the pantry door with the rules written large. If unknown enters past 10 steps, shoot. No one argued with it now. The last hours had done that work already. I walked the service door hall and saw Zahir staring at the lock. He noticed me and looked away. He said, "If I could get my sister, I would bring her here. She is a good person." I said, "I believe you." He asked, "If someone asked for the door in exchange for her, what would you say?" I said, "I would say no. Then I would be ready for that person to try anyway." He nodded, like he had expected that answer and hated it. I watched him walk away. I did not follow. You cannot fix a question that large for someone. You can only make sure your locks work. By evening, the wind rose again. We used it for a short window and charged the drone batteries. Ava took first watch at the screens and logged every flicker. She wrote clean, even lines. I looked over her shoulder and pointed out the blind angles again. She said she had them marked in her head. I believed her. She had stopped asking when the gates would open. She started asking where I wanted the next stack of cans. That told me where we were in this story. Morning brought a quiet that felt staged. No power, no grid hum, just a faint whistle through the vents. When I turned the tap, the water came in spurts and then slowed to a crawl. That was the first clear sign the pressure system was dying. Renee caught the change right away and shut the valve to save what was left in the lines. She moved with purpose but said nothing. We both knew what it meant. The city pumps were offline. The gas flickered weakly too, and the stove wouldn't hold a steady flame. Civilization was losing its rhythm, one system at a time. We switched to stored water and camp stoves, running them outside under the porch where the smell wouldn't carry. The air felt sharper without the old background sounds. No distant traffic, no ferry horns, no trains from the mainland. Just wind and the quiet tick of metal cooling. Gus worked on the trench we'd planned in front of the gate, shallow and narrow, enough to catch a wheel. He and Noah took turns digging with a spade and a flat bar, using the car as cover. We didn't talk much. Talking slowed hands. The attack came the next afternoon, during a stretch of still air. The first sound was a heavy engine climbing the hill. It wasn't the SUV again. The tone was lower, deeper. Diesel, heavy axle, long frame. I stepped to the monitor just as the lens caught a large front grille bursting through the fog. A city hauler, one of those municipal garbage trucks, armored with scrap. Its windshield was painted black except for two narrow slits cut out at driver height. The bed was chained down with wire, and something protruded from the roof, a pipe or a barrel. The truck rolled in a straight line toward the gate, picking up speed. I shouted for cover before it hit. The impact shook the yard, metal on metal. The crossbeam bent inward, but didn't give on the first try. The truck reversed, revved again, and slammed harder. The bottom hinge snapped with a crack like gunfire. Renee was already moving people to positions. Noah ducked to the garage and cut the manual power to the sentry platform. Gus ran to the mudroom, grabbed the spear, and planted himself by the side entrance. Ava dragged Marina and May toward the pantry without being told. We had rehearsed this enough to run it half asleep. On the third hit, the gate folded. The truck rolled halfway through, grinding to a stop in the trench. Its front bumper dug in and pinned itself. Then, the roof mount fired. Short mechanical bursts, not human cadence. A mounted rifle firing in short intervals, spraying blind into the yard. Sparks kicked off the fence posts. Renee crouched by the generator housing and waved me over. She said, "It's remote-driven. No one's inside." I nodded and motioned to Noah. He slid around the side path toward the rear of the truck with a long pole cutter in hand. 12 people came through the breach. Mixed clothes, police vests, construction gear, old helmets. One man carried a sledge, another a shotgun. The rest had pistols and makeshift blades. Their formation was sloppy but determined. The remote truck's gun mount stopped firing after a few bursts, maybe jammed or out of rounds. I gave the signal and Gus hit the switch for the sentry platform from the inside. The weapon fired short, fast cuts across the yard. Controlled bursts meant to scatter, not spray. 3 raiders dropped before they could reach the deck. The rest dove for cover behind the wrecked gate. One man shouted orders through a handheld radio. His tone was clipped, professional. I knew it. Rago was there, not visible, but leading them from somewhere near the bend. He wanted the gate cleared without wasting his own body. That's how organized men think. Use noise and fear to make others take the bullets first. Inside, Renee pulled the medical bin and lined the hallway with bleach bottles for makeshift barriers. Harold guarded the back door with a revolver, shaking but steady. Marina sat by the stairwell holding the child tight. Zahir wasn't in sight. I called his name once. No answer. The side service door light flashed briefly on the monitor. A sensor trip. I realized then what he had done. The latch we'd warned him to keep locked was open. I shouted for Noah and ran to intercept. By the time I reached the basement corridor, the door was swinging open and cold air was pouring in. A shadow moved fast across the wall. Zahir was gone. He'd opened the way for them. Fear, desperation, or both. It didn't matter anymore. A gunshot from outside broke my focus. Gus yelled from the yard that the truck had stalled. He was trying to hold the gate line when another burst tore through the corner panel. I saw him go down, still clutching the spear. We fell back through the kitchen hall. The house turned into a maze of low light and hard edges. I took the right corridor, Noah the left. Renee stayed by the pantry door with the others. The raiders hit the front door first and got tangled in the debris we'd piled up days earlier. Their leader tried to climb the banister, got shot through the leg, and fell back into his own line. I saw two more shapes rush through the window and get cut down by a single burst from the sentry platform. The machine clicked dry right after. No more ammo. The air outside changed again. New noise coming. Not engines, but low moans and slaps against metal. Infected. The sound carried uphill like a slow tide. The fighting had drawn them. Their silhouettes appeared in the gaps between trees. Dozens of them, maybe more. The raiders turned their guns outward now, trying to hold both directions. Panic unravels groups faster than bullets. I watched through a cracked shutter as the first infected reached the gate and pulled one of the raiders to the ground. The rest scattered, shooting in all directions. Gianna rushed to run between shots, with the baby in her arms. They disappeared around the corner, but someone ran after them. Noah couldn't shoot because of the bodies and smoke. All that remained was to hope that they had successfully escaped and were alive. I dragged Gus's body back inside, while Noah ran to the truck. He used the pole cutter to slice the exposed harness under the chassis. Sparks flashed, and the engine died. The mounted rifle fell silent for good. He ran back under fire from two remaining raiders who were still alive on the left side of the yard. He ducked behind the wall, breathing through his teeth. He said, "Truck's done. Power line cut." I said, "Then we close the door on this." I reached the hallway where Renee was reloading. We moved together, short and clean. I took the corner, fired twice, dropped one man halfway through the living room window. The second raider panicked and ran toward the rear exit, straight into the infected pouring through the breach. He didn't even get a scream out. The noise outside rose to chaos. You could hear human shouts blend with guttural sounds and breaking glass. Harold and May rushed to cover the back deck where fire had started from a ruptured propane tank. Flames climbed fast up the railing. They used sand buckets to knock it down before it spread. Smoke rolled through the kitchen vents. Renee yelled for everyone to stay low. The infected smell smoke too. It keeps them cautious for seconds at least. We used those seconds to clear the last man near the porch. Then the gunfire outside turned distant. The surviving raiders were running downhill with the infected chasing. We held position until the noise faded. When I stepped outside, the yard looked like a broken construction site. Metal, blood, dirt, tire tracks. The truck sat dead against the trench, its front wheels hanging at angles. The smell was heavy but bearable. We moved bodies into a pile by the gate. The infected had taken some already, dragged them halfway down the hill. We didn't chase. There was no point. The important thing was sealing the breach before more followed. Renee and Noah gathered tools. We used shelving panels, sheet metal, and whatever we could find. Sparks from the welder snapped through the silence. The air stayed thick with smoke. Marina kept the child in the pantry and tried to read something to her from an old picture book. I heard her voice through the walls, shaking but steady. That sound kept the house from falling apart. When we finished the patchwork barricade, it looked rough but solid. We added 2 interior braces behind it. The house could breathe again. Renee took a head count. Owen and Gus gone. Zahir gone. May wounded but stable. Harold hit with shrapnel but alive. Everyone else shaken. I sat down on the stairs, shoulder burning where the wound had reopened. Renee unwrapped it and changed the dressing again. Her hands didn't tremble. She said, "We hold another night, then reinforce everything double." I said, "He'll come again." She said, "Then we'll be ready." When the last generator window ran that night, I watched the camera feeds blink through static. The city below was gone. No lights, no motion, only faint orange glow where fires burned out of control. The infected still roamed the lower streets in clusters. A few moved up the hill but lost interest when the house went silent. We slept in shifts again, rifles within reach. Each of us listened to different sounds: the hum of the patched fence, the creak of floorboards, the faraway cries of the dying city. I didn't close my eyes long. I didn't need to. The pattern was clear now. They had failed to take us by words, and then by force. The next time, they'd bring chaos itself and let it do the work for them. And when that happened, we would either be the wall or part of what broke against it. The next morning, the sky had that pale, washed-out color that makes time hard to judge. I stood on the deck and looked toward the city. The air was hazy but still. No power lines humming, no glow from the towers. The sound of civilization had flattened into background wind. It felt permanent. The only motion came from the smoke drifting in slow strips across the harbor. I realized I hadn't heard a plane or helicopter in days. That silence was heavier than gunfire. It meant the world wasn't just wounded anymore. It was finished. Renee joined me with her jacket zipped up and her hair tied back. She handed me a thermos of coffee and said the words she'd been avoiding. "We can't keep this many people here, Marcus. Not with the grid gone. The batteries won't hold forever." She was right. The estate had been built for luxury, not siege. The freezers, the purifier, the pumps. All of it demanded power we couldn't keep feeding. The house was too big, and the mouths too many. I didn't answer her then. I just stared down at the ruined gate. Noah and I spent most of the day tightening the new barricade with additional steel plates we stripped from the garage. The patch held firm, but I could feel its weakness. One good push from a heavy vehicle and it would fold again. We moved sandbags to the inner driveway and dragged 2 cars across the yard to act as cover points. The trench Gus had dug was deeper now, half filled with debris and spent casings. We left it that way. It gave us one more obstacle. By late afternoon, I noticed the infected moving closer to the upper road. They'd followed the noise from the fight, drawn by the echoes and scent. Their pace was uneven, slow but constant. Some walked upright, others crawled or jerked in sudden bursts. One climbed over a fallen fence and dropped onto the road, landing in a crouch before standing again. They were learning small things, or maybe just following instinct. Either way, it was changing. At dinner, Marina said she wanted to leave the city once we could refuel. She said, "If the grid is gone, there's no reason to stay. We could go inland." Renee replied, "We wouldn't make it past the bridges. Every crossing is either blown or blocked." Marina said, "Then we try the back roads." I cut the discussion short. "No one moves until we know who's left out there. Rago isn't gone. He's planning another push. We move when we can't stay, not before." The table went quiet after that. Everyone understood the tone. The next day, we found the first sign of betrayal that wasn't obvious. A coded light signal from the lower slope flashed twice before dawn. At first, I thought it was reflection, but it repeated, deliberate and timed. I checked the thermal camera. One heat signature, a man kneeling beside a fallen branch pile. Rago again. I recognized the stance. He wasn't alone this time. A second figure crouched near him, smaller, unarmed. It took me a few seconds to realize who it was. Zahir. He'd survived and found new allegiance. Renee saw my face and asked what I'd found. I didn't answer right away. I zoomed in on the image and caught the faint line of a flare in Rago's hand. He was marking distance for another approach. That was when I knew what was coming next. I said it out loud so everyone heard. "They're not done. They'll use the infected this time. They'll lead them up here. Noah asked, "How?" I said, "Noise, blood, fire. Doesn't take much anymore." We spent the morning boarding windows and moving supplies to the inner rooms. Every footstep sounded deliberate. Nobody wasted motion. May stayed in the kitchen organizing what food we had left into smaller sealed batches. Renee boiled the last of the clean water to refill the bottles. Marina packed clothes in case we had to run. Ava helped her without complaint. For the first time since this began, no one argued about orders. Fear and exhaustion do what logic can't. Around noon, we caught movement on the lower road. Rago's group again, maybe 5 left, all armed. They carried red gas cans, moving quickly between abandoned cars. I knew what they were doing. They were laying fire paths to herd the infected upward. I told Noah to prep the drones even if it cost power. He launched one, hovering high enough to avoid sound detection. The live feed showed the men pouring lines of fuel and stepping back. I could almost feel the heat before they even lit it. The fires started small, then spread fast. Black smoke rose between the trees. The infected swarmed toward the sound, drawn straight into the flames. Some ran, some stumbled, some burned alive, and kept moving anyway. It looked like a wall of human shapes on fire, crawling up toward us. Rago's men didn't stay to watch. They retreated behind the smoke, waiting for the fire to drive the survivors uphill. I shut down the drone to save its battery and said nothing for a while. When the first infected reached the lower gate, they were half burned and moving in jerks. We picked them off one by one through the narrow slats. Noah stayed steady on the scope, calm and methodical. Ava fed him spare magazines without being asked. Renee threw salt over the entry floor and sealed the inner vents with tape to block the stench. It was more than smell. It was contamination. Burned flesh and open wounds spread things faster than bites. By late afternoon, the fire had burned itself out, but left the yard blackened and uneven. We counted 6 infected tangled in the wire near the breach. I told Noah not to go near them yet. They still twitched. We used long poles to push the bodies down into the trench and covered them with loose dirt. No one talked while we worked. The world was already talking loud enough through the smell of smoke and rot. That night the sky glowed orange over the city. I stood on the roof with binoculars, scanning for movement. In the distance, you could see parts of downtown still burning. The old bridge had collapsed completely, leaving only the steel arches over the water. I saw no helicopters, no ships, no lights from the mainland. We were alone for real this time, no illusions left. I sat on the roof for a long time, thinking about the map Rago had drawn with those 2 circles. Our road and our fuel shed. He hadn't taken either yet. That meant he'd come again. Renee joined me close to midnight. She said she couldn't sleep. She said, "You've changed, Marcus." I said, "Everyone has." She said, "No, you stopped feeling sorry for it." I didn't answer. She wasn't wrong. The line between survival and cruelty had blurred. You start doing what needs to be done, and the rest follows naturally. She stayed beside me in silence after that. Neither of us needed comfort, just confirmation that we were still awake. Day 21 began with rain. It came hard, then steady, washing away soot and blood from the courtyard. The water tanks filled fast. We caught as much as we could. It felt like a small victory, even if it only bought us another few days. While we worked, I kept watching the tree line. Rago wasn't stupid enough to come during rain, but he'd be close, watching again. Every survivor I'd ever met before the outbreak said the same thing. People are worse than hunger. Now I understood it fully. When the rain eased, Renee called me inside. May's condition had worsened. The wound on her leg from the shrapnel had gone grey around the edges. She was running a fever. Renee tried everything. Boiled bandages, antiseptic, heat packs. But the infection had spread too fast. I knew what came next. Even before Renee looked at me. She didn't need to ask permission. I gave a small nod, and she drew a measured dose from the medical box. The shot took minutes to work. May stopped breathing quietly. No one spoke for a long time after that. We buried her in the yard beside Gus and Owen, wrapped in tarp and tied with cord. Rain hit the plastic with dull thuds as we covered her. I stood at the edge, holding the shovel until the handle felt slick. Marina cried quietly. Ava held her hand. Harold said a few words, but they barely carried over the wind. When it was done, I walked to the fence and stared at the slope below. The city was still burning, and I could almost see movement near the bend again. That night, I made a decision I didn't say out loud. I would end Rego before he made another move. It wasn't anger, it was necessity. His kind never stopped. He'd wait for weakness or for grief to break our rhythm. I couldn't let that happen. When I told Renee later, she didn't argue. She only said, "Do it clean." I promised her I would. We prepared quietly the next morning. Noah packed a small kit: rifle, radio, flashlight, 1 bottle of water. Renee handed me a strip of antiseptic cloth and told me to wrap my shoulder before I left. I looked around the house one last time. Everyone was in their place. Ava watching the monitors, Marina cooking with what little gas was left, Harold cleaning the revolver, Renee watching the door. Everything was as it should be, even if it wouldn't stay that way for long. I left before sunrise, walking down the slope with slow, careful steps, keeping to the edge where the brush broke the silhouette. The air smelled of wet ash and rust. I carried the rifle low, finger resting on the guard. Every sound felt amplified. When I reached the bend, I saw the tracks from the truck still embedded in the dirt. A trail of muddy footprints led deeper toward the industrial park. I followed them without hesitation. There was no fear left in me, only precision. Rago's camp was less than half a mile away, tucked behind a collapsed wall. A fire burned low under a metal sheet, throwing pale light on their faces. I counted 4 people, including Rago. Zahir wasn't there, either dead or gone. Rago sat with his rifle across his knees, talking quietly. I waited until he sent one of his men to the perimeter. When the man passed within 30 feet, I stepped out from cover and fired once. The shot dropped him instantly. The others froze. Rago reached for his weapon, but I was faster. I aimed center and fired again. The round hit him in the chest and threw him back into the mud. The rest ran. I didn't chase. I walked to Rego's body and looked down. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing. His radio still buzzed faintly. I took it, turned it off, and walked away. The rain started again halfway back to the house. By the time I reached the gate, my clothes were soaked and my hands steady. Renee opened the door without a word. I stepped inside, set the rifle down, and sat on the floor. She asked if it was done. I said, "Yes." She said, "Then we move on." We both knew that meant more than survival now. It meant acceptance. The world outside had fallen, and the only laws left were the ones we made ourselves. The gunfire was still ringing in my head long after I left the camp behind. Every step back to the hill felt heavier. The rain came down steady, soft at first, then harder until it blurred the edges of the road. My hands were cold and stiff around the rifle. I could feel the weight of what I'd done. But there wasn't guilt, just a clean, flat calm. Rago was gone. The threat that haunted every night since the outbreak had been erased. The only thing left now was the aftermath. When I reached the property line, the gate lights were dead, but the new barricade still stood. I tapped twice on the metal, and Noah answered with the prearranged click from inside. He opened the small viewing slit before unlatching the door. Renee stood behind him, holding a lantern, her expression unreadable. She looked at me for a few seconds before asking the only question that mattered. "Was it him?" I nodded once. She asked nothing else. I think she knew from the way I moved that it was over. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and damp wood. The rain had brought down half the outer tarp over the windows, and water had pooled in the corner near the mudroom. Harold was asleep in his chair, rifle across his lap, and Ava sat near the monitor desk with headphones around her neck. When she saw me, she didn't ask where I'd been. She just stood, walked over, and hugged me without saying anything. I didn't move for a long moment. When she stepped back, she whispered that she'd heard distant shooting. I said, "Not anymore." The next morning, the rain stopped, but left a layer of fog over the hill. The yard looked washed clean, but that was an illusion. The bloodstains from the last fight were still there, only faded. Renee started boiling water again, while Noah checked the generator housing for leaks. He found corrosion on one of the fuel lines and patched it with tape and resin. We had to run power for just 10 minutes to stabilize the freezer, and even that felt like a risk now. The silence outside was too fragile. Marina came to me after breakfast, her eyes red from crying. She said, "We can't bury everyone here. The smell will draw them." She was right. The graves by the fence had started to leach through the soil after the rain. I told Noah and Harold to build a small burn pit near the lower edge, away from the main yard. We used what fuel we had left and took turns carrying bodies wrapped in plastic. I didn't look at their faces anymore. By noon, the fire was burning hot enough to erase all traces of what we'd lost. That night, for the first time in days, the house stayed quiet. The infected had moved downhill again, following the trail of smoke and burnt flesh. We kept watch anyway. I took the roof. The wind was cold, and the sky had that pale glow from distant fires still smoldering in the city. You could see the remains of downtown, half-standing buildings, the black skeletons of towers. No lights, no motion. I stayed up there until dawn. Every hour I expected to see something moving on the road again, but nothing came. Day 25 started with a dry wind that carried the smell of rot. Renee said the air quality would get worse now that the fires were dying out. She made everyone wear masks when we went outside. Noah managed to get one of the smaller drones working again and sent it up for a short flight. It picked up faint movement along the shoreline. Groups of infected dragging through shallow water, hundreds of them. They were spreading out, moving toward higher ground. I knew what that meant. The lower city was finally dead. They had nothing left to eat there. We spent the rest of the day reinforcing the house. I cut more steel plates from the old supply crates and nailed them over the basement vents. Harold ran cable through the walls so the remaining cameras could run off a single battery hub. Renee rationed what medicine we had left. The antibiotics were almost gone. She looked tired but steady. I saw her writing something in her notebook later that night. Supplies, dosage notes, maybe plans for evacuation. She closed it when I walked in. I didn't ask what she'd written. Sophia started coughing again that evening. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the hall. She said she felt fine, just tired. Renee checked her temperature and frowned. The reading was high. She told her to rest and drink more water. The girl insisted she'd just caught something from the rain, but Renee looked at me when she said it. There was no rain-borne illness left. Not anymore. I didn't say what I was thinking. We had already buried too many. The next morning, Sophia's fever hadn't broken. She was pale, sweating through her shirt, and her eyes had that glassy focus I'd seen before in people who'd been scratched. Renee asked if she'd been hurt during the last attack. Sophia said no, but her voice trembled. Noah refused to believe it. He stood beside her bed the entire time, saying it would pass, that she wasn't infected. I had no proof yet, so I said nothing, but I ordered her room sealed off, just in case. Renee didn't like that. She said, "You're treating her like she's already dead." I said, "I'm treating her like she might live if we don't all die first." That ended the argument. She knew I was right, even if she hated the logic. Survival had no space for sympathy anymore. That afternoon, the last of the gas ran out. The generator died mid-cycle, cutting the lights and the freezer together. We switched fully to battery and solar, but the panels weren't getting much charge under the haze. It was only a matter of days before we'd be running on stored power alone. I told Noah to dismantle one of the wind turbines for parts and use the bearings to fix the second. He said it might work if the wind held steady. That was the first time I realized I was giving orders automatically, without even thinking of it as choice. Leadership had turned into reflex. By nightfall, Sophia was worse. She started muttering in her sleep, jerking her hands as if trying to grab something that wasn't there. Renee stayed beside her with a flashlight, watching every movement. Noah refused to leave the room. I told him to come out before it got dark, but he ignored me. Around midnight, I heard a sound from the hallway. Metal scraping wood. I grabbed the rifle and ran. The door to Sophia's room was half open. Noah stood inside, crying. She was gone. The window was broken, and a thin trail of blood led across the floor. We found her outside near the fence at dawn. She was moving slow, almost like she didn't know what she was anymore. Her skin had gone grey, her mouth torn from the inside. She turned when she heard our footsteps and took one staggering step forward. Noah shouted her name and started running, but I pulled him back by the collar. He fought me until Renee yelled, "Stop!" and raised her pistol. She fired once. Sophia dropped instantly. The sound hung in the air long after she hit the ground. Noah collapsed against the fence. He didn't speak for hours. Renee buried Sophia alone, near the others. Marina stayed inside with Ava, who was shaking silently. I stood by the trench, staring at the burned gate. There was no anger left in me, only exhaustion. Every loss made the hill smaller, emptier, but at least now there was clarity. No illusions, no outsiders left, only blood we knew and trusted. That night, I sat in the comms room with the last working radio on low volume. The frequencies were empty except for faint static. No government messages, no broadcasts, not even automated loops. The world had gone quiet for good. Renee came in after midnight and set down 2 mugs of water. She said the same words she'd said the night the outbreak started. "Then we hold here." I nodded. The difference was, this time, there was nothing left outside worth holding for. Only us, the house, and the silence between the storms that would keep coming. By the next morning, the hill smelled of smoke and wet earth. I sat on the steps outside the garage, staring at the dirt where we had buried Sophia. The rain had flattened the ground overnight, leaving only a shallow mark. Noah hadn't spoken since the burial. He stayed inside near her room, refusing to eat, staring at the floor. Renee said he'd come back to himself in time, but I wasn't sure. You can't undo what he saw. The air was colder that day. It carried a different quiet, the kind that makes sound travel farther than it should. I walked the perimeter slowly, checking every bolt, every wire. The patched gate held. The trench had filled with rainwater and ashes, thick enough to hide what lay underneath. Beyond it, the lower slope was empty. The infected had wandered downhill again, following the burned path Rhaego's group had made. I could see 1 or 2 limping through the distant fog, too slow to matter now. For the first time in weeks, we weren't being watched. Renee spent the morning writing in her notebook again. She kept flipping back through pages, crossing out old entries, adding new notes. She didn't let me see what she'd written. I didn't press her. Everyone copes in their own way. Marina cleaned the kitchen for the 3rd time, as if order could undo what the world had become. Harold fiddled with the radio, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the knobs. It was just static and broken tones. He still said he could hear patterns in it. By midday, the water line gave out completely. Nothing came from the taps, not even air. We switched to the rain barrels, boiling what we could. The air filters in the basement hummed once and then went dead, the last of the backup charge gone. The silence afterward felt wrong. Every hum that disappeared made the house feel less like home and more like a tomb with lights. I told Noah to strip one of the turbines for parts. He didn't answer, but I saw him nod later and head outside with a wrench set. When he came back in, he handed me a piece of rusted metal. He said, "Bearings are gone. We can't fix it without new ones." I said, "Then take the panels from the roof instead. At least those we can patch." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw anger. Not wild, just clean. He said, "You always have an answer, but none of them bring anyone back." I didn't respond. He was right. I'd run out of words that mattered. That night, Renee and I sat by the small fire in the living room. We had started burning scraps of furniture to keep warm. We unlatched 2 windows by a hand's width and cracked the flue. Smoke stayed thin, and the room stayed livable. She watched the flames and said she couldn't remember what day it was anymore. I told her it didn't matter. The world outside had stopped keeping time, so we didn't need to either. She nodded and leaned back against the wall. She said, I keep thinking about that first day, when we still believed the power would come back. I said, we believed because we had to. She smiled faintly. Now we just have to live with the truth. On the morning of day 28, I heard something that didn't fit. Not gunfire, not wind. Engines. Multiple, faint but real. I climbed to the roof with binoculars and scanned the lower road. A convoy was moving slowly through the fog. 3 vehicles, armored, painted black with no markings. They moved in a tight line, deliberate, not scavengers. It looked military, but the uniforms I glimpsed through the scopes weren't standard. The vehicle stopped near the collapsed bridge, idled for a few minutes, then turned east toward the industrial zone. I watched them until they disappeared. Renee climbed up behind me. She said, they looked organized. I said, too organized. Not Rhaego's crew, different trucks, cleaner lines, and no precinct slang on the radio. She said, do you think they're government? I said, if they were, they'd be flying flags. She nodded, her eyes narrowing. Then they're just another kind of scavenger. She was right. Those who survived the longest weren't the strongest, just the most adaptable. That convoy would come our way eventually. People like that always do. Noah spent the afternoon building crude traps along the lower path. Trip lines with cans, pressure snares, noise deterrents. I helped him set them, though part of me knew it was pointless. Nothing man-made lasts long anymore. Not when you're up against hunger, disease, and desperation all at once. Still, it gave him something to do. That was enough. As evening came, the sky turned a dull red from fires still burning near the shoreline. I sat on the deck watching the glow, thinking about Rhaego, about all the men I'd buried, and about how far we'd fallen. Survival had stripped us down to instinct. Morality wasn't gone. It just cost more than anyone could afford. Renee came out and sat beside me without speaking. The wind smelled of rust and sea salt. We stayed like that for hours, waiting for nothing in particular. The next day, the convoy appeared again, this time closer. 2 vehicles instead of 3, both armored, both moving uphill. I didn't sound the alarm immediately. I wanted to see what they'd do. They stopped halfway to the bend, engines idling. A loudspeaker crackled, and a man's voice carried through the fog. He said, residents of the hill compound, this is a controlled area. Evacuate and submit for processing. I didn't answer. The voice repeated the message twice, then silence. The vehicles stayed put for 5 minutes, then reversed down the road. They weren't attacking. Yet. They were testing. Renee joined me at the comms desk. She said, you think it's the same group that cleared the precinct? I said, could be, or a splinter from it. She said, what do we do if they come back? I said, we do what we always do, we hold. She stared at me for a long time, then said quietly, you're turning into the wall you keep talking about. I didn't argue. I'd made peace with that long ago. By evening, the fog thickened again. Noah checked the traps and came back with blood on his hands, not his own. One of the snares had caught an infected, a small one, half-starved. He said it wasn't moving when he found it. I told him to burn the body anyway. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, took the can of fuel, and walked back out into the mist. When he returned, he smelled of smoke, but his eyes were clear. I could see something hard settling in him, the same thing that had taken root in me. That night we slept in short bursts, rifles close, doors sealed, no lights, no sound. I woke once to the faint hum of an engine somewhere far below. It faded after a few minutes, replaced by the wind and the creak of the house settling. Every sound meant something now. Every silence did too. I lay there thinking about the men in those black vehicles, about what kind of order they still thought they were enforcing. Maybe they called it law, maybe safety. It did not matter. Whatever system they belonged to, it was not ours. Dawn came thin and grey. The air smelled of wet wood and ash. I made a slow round of the interior and put a hand on every brace and bolt. Renee met me in the kitchen entry with her notebook and a flat voice. She said, "Water is 3 full barrels and 1/2. I said, "We move at first light tomorrow if we live through today." She nodded once. There was nothing else to debate. Harold was in his chair by the radio with the set turned off. He had fallen asleep there during the last watch. I called his name and put a hand on his shoulder. He did not respond. Renee checked him, counted, and set her hand down gentle. She wrote the time in her book and closed it. No one cried. We dug a narrow place by the lower hedge where the soil stayed soft and buried him fast with a tarp and cord. I stood a minute at the edge and then went back to the door. The day was already moving. Noah brought the last flight battery to the comms desk. He had stripped the spare drone to frame and motor, then taped a small speaker to the underside. Ava logged camera angles and blind corners and looked up at me. She said, "If a crowd forms, I can pull some away downhill." I said, "One pass only, no second loop." She understood. Everything was one use now. Late morning, movement built on the lower road. First a thin line of infected, then more behind them. Among them, one figure stood out, tall and thick through the shoulders, head moving in slow arcs, not random. It walked to the old wire, pressed it with one hand, stepped back, then studied the patched gate. It pulled at a loose seam with a fallen signpost until the metal puckered. It was not guessing, it was testing. I called Renee and Noah to the screen. I said, "This one is learning, joints and seams." Renee said, "If it enters, aim for knee and shoulder." Noah said, "I will take the roof for a better angle." He moved before I answered. Ava tracked the big one's turns and mirrored the timing with her eyes so she could call movement without looking away from her panel. Engines came up the hill before noon. Not one, but two, sharp and close. The black armored trucks rolled to a stop just short of the bend. A loudspeaker crackled. A man's voice announced a controlled zone and ordered evacuation and processing. I did not touch the intercom. The message repeated and cut. Glass bottles burst on rocks down road and snapped through the trees. Sharp metal rattle made on purpose. More infected turned uphill. The trucks idled and inched forward in short moves, pushing abandoned cars aside to make a lane. This was herding and pressure set to a clock. We took posts, Renee in the hall, Ava on pantry and stair, Noah on the roof with the rifle and extra magazines. I held the front corridor with the carbine and the spear tool. The first infected reached the braces and clawed. The big one moved smaller bodies aside and pulled at the panel again, hands steady, head turning to track the house. It reached through a gap and slammed the inner brace to find play. Its forearm was thick, skin torn in strips, eyes fixed and alert. The first truck nosed toward the trench and slowed. Its front wheels spun and threw wet dirt. The second truck fanned left and shoved bodies into the opening until the pile built into a ramp. The driver wanted weight against the seam. The loudspeaker stayed off. The engine note rose. The bumper touched the panel and pushed. Bolts squealed. The brace groaned and gave a finger's width. On my word, Ava launched the drone. It skimmed the side road, speaker rattling. Dozens peeled away from the gate and turned after the sound. The large one paused, turned toward the drone, then reset on the fence and resumed pulling the panel in short, brutal moves. The first truck eased off and backed for a new run. The second kept feeding the ramp and edged forward. I waited for the engine to load, then called to the roof. I said, "On the driver slot." Noah answered, "I have it." The second truck pushed. I said, "Now." He fired. The slot popped and the truck lurched, lost throttle, and rolled back into the trench at a bad angle. The undercarriage caught and stuck. The first truck clipped it trying to turn. Metal banged and echoed. The big infected heaved the panel inward and stepped through the opening in a single clean move. It lifted a loose post with both hands and struck the entry frame. The safety film held a moment, then started to spider under the next hit. Renee shouted from my left. She said, "Back 2 steps." I moved. She flung a bucket of bleach and water across the tiles. The big one stepped into the slick and slid, caught the frame with raw strength, and rebalanced fast. It swung again, and the frame gave. Splinters flew. The post stuck in a wedge for a heartbeat. That pause was our window. I drove the spear into its thigh and pushed until the tip bit tile. Renee put 2 into the same leg to keep it down. It tore the shaft free and lunged toward the stair, where Ava held the carbine steady. Noah fired through the skylight and hit the shoulder joint that held the post. The arm sagged. Ava put 3 into the center mass and then 1 into the knee. The knee folded, but the thing crawled using both hands, steady and direct. It reached for Ava's ankle. I looped the chain from the inner brace under its arm and hauled. Renee kicked the post aside and jammed a wood wedge against its other shoulder. The chain cut into my palms, and the frame shifted on the wet tile. Outside, the stuck truck ground its wheels. The second truck tried to free itself and tore a fuel line. A sheet of flame rolled from under the front, caught the ramp of bodies, and spread along the trench edge. The heat drove the herd back and opened a narrow, empty lane. Ava saw it first. She said, "Door! Now!" Renee threw her weight into the entry panel. The hinge seated and shrieked. I dragged the chain hard and slid the body farther into the slick. Renee shot the first bolt. Ava left the stair for 2 steps, hit the panel with her shoulder, and the second bolt seated with a hard snap. The third stuck. I heaved on the chain. Renee slammed the latch with the heel of her hand and it caught. The entry sealed again, thin, but sealed. The big one tore at the wedge and chain with method, not panic. It braced the bad knee under and pushed with hips and back. The frame creaked. I shoved the spear back into the joint seam and leaned with everything I had. Renee reloaded and aimed for the shoulder. She said, "On 3. I said, "1. She fired 2 clean shots into the joint. The arm slumped. The creature turned its head and tracked Ava again, hand searching for a hold. Ava stepped close, set the muzzle against the side of the neck at a safe angle, and fired once. The body went slack and stopped moving. We held position and counted to 30 out loud. Nothing else happened. I let the chain go. It did not stir. We ran a sweep. No other bodies inside. The fire at the trench burned hot and forced the remaining infected downhill. The first truck reversed blind with doors open and rolled away with 2 men hanging on the side. The stuck truck burned until its hood collapsed and the flames eased. The yard cleared in front of us. Smoke hung low and the metal panels popped as they cooled. In the quiet after, glass cracked overhead. A beam in the kitchen ceiling shifted and a sheet of shards fell. Marina had left the pantry during the rush. The falling beam struck her across the back and pinned her against the counter. Renee reached her in seconds, checked, and shook her head. The breath left and did not return. We covered her with a tarp and stood in a line. There were no words that would change it. We moved her to the study and shut the door. We worked without pause. Ava pulled the packs we had kept ready. Water, dry food, radios, spare batteries, medical maps. Noah took the tool roll and a belt of hardware. Renee locked the med kit and slid a small photo into her pocket. I took the rifle, 2 magazines, the cut spear shaft, and a handful of laminated tags we had collected from bodies. One tag was a precinct access card with a grid square inked on the back. It matched the sector where Sophia's brother had sent his last message weeks ago. It did not promise anything. It gave us a route. We did one last inventory, 4 packs. That was the count now. I left a note on the pantry door that read, "No bodies inside, no supplies left." It was true enough. A lie would bring people in and get them hurt. The truth might keep them moving. We dragged the big body to the side hall and covered it. We closed the inner door behind us out of habit and stepped into the yard. The patched gate would not stop anything anymore. The road downhill was empty for the first time in a long time. We slept in the garage with boots on and rifles against the wall. No one spoke much. The house clicked and settled and stayed quiet. I lay awake and listened to my family breathe, and to the faint tick of cooling metal, and to the wind moving in the trees below the slope. The hill had given us time. It had taken people from us and held us through a line of days until we learned how to move again. That was enough. At first light, we stepped onto the road. The air off the water was cold and clean. The city sat under smoke and ash with no sound and no lights. We did not look back long. I took the lead. Renee watched our rear. Noah walked inside the line with the map. Ava watched the flanks. We moved in a tight file, steady and quiet. The card in my pocket tapped my leg with each step. We passed the bend where the white van had once parked, and the spot where bait letters had been pushed under the gate. The paper was gone. The road dipped and trees closed in. A single bird lifted and drifted toward the water. No sirens, no broadcasts, no engines. Just us, and a route drawn by someone who had not lived to use it. I turned to my family. I said, "No hero moves, no speeches. We reach the square or we fall back. We do it together." Renee said, "Together." Noah and Ava both nodded. That was the only oath we needed. We went down off the hill toward the grid square that someone had called a center, and someone else had turned into a trap. There would be more men with clean trucks and clipped voices. There would be more infected that watched and learned. That was the world now. We were ready to walk into it. We had learned what it cost and who we were after the paying. And we were still here. Alive and more dangerous than ever. That's all for now, Survivor. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep these stories alive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. And a huge thank you to everyone supporting this channel with extra memberships, especially Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod, Jedala, The Great Anywho. Thanks. Also drop a comment and let me know what story you want to hear next. Jack's Nightmares signing off.